The doctor's office smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, and I remember thinking that was such a strange thing to notice. The smell of the room where my marriage finally ended. I was sitting in one of those padded chairs with the wooden armrests, the kind that are designed to look comfortable but never really are. My husband was next to me. Not close. There was maybe 8 inches of space between us, but it felt like the width of an entire country. He had his hands folded in his lap, looking at the wall. I was looking at my hands. We'd been married for 22 years, and we had completely forgotten how to be in a room together. The doctor came in with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and he sat down across from us and opened the folder on his desk like he was about to tell us something routine. A mortgage renewal. An overdue library book. Something manageable. He looked at my husband first, then at me, and then he said it. You should know, based on these results, that conception would have been biologically impossible on your husband's end. Has been for some time, actually. Likely his entire adult life. I stopped breathing. Not because I didn't understand what he meant. I understood immediately, completely, the way you understand something you've been quietly afraid of for 20 years. I stopped breathing because my husband, my quiet, steady, endlessly patient husband, turned and looked at me, and there was nothing in his eyes. Not surprise, not confusion, not the beginning of a question. Just a long, tired recognition. And I knew then that he had known, not suspected. Known. For years. Maybe for most of our marriage, he had known something that I thought was buried so deep it would never surface. And he had chosen to say nothing. To stay. To pour coffee every morning and mow the lawn every Saturday and drive our daughter to her skating lessons and sit across from me at dinner for 2 decades, knowing. I have thought about that moment every single day since. I was 28 when I met my husband at a work event in downtown Toronto. He was in project management at a construction firm. I was doing administrative work at a nonprofit. We ended up next to each other at one of those standing cocktail tables because neither of us wanted to be there, and we spent the whole evening making fun of the canapes. He made me laugh so hard I spilled my sparkling water. He handed me a cocktail napkin without making it weird. I thought, this one's different. We dated for 2 years. He was thoughtful in that quiet way that doesn't announce itself. He remembered the name of my childhood dog when I mentioned it once in passing. He'd check in when he knew I had a hard day coming. He wasn't flashy. He was solid, and I had spent enough time with men who weren't solid that I knew the difference. We got engaged at a small dinner, just the two of us at a restaurant on Queen Street West. No grand gesture. He said he couldn't imagine building a life with anyone else. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We got married the following autumn in a small ceremony outside of Guelph. His family, mine, are close friends. My mother cried. His father shook my hand and then pulled me into a hug and said, "Welcome to the family." I remember thinking, I chose well. What I did not tell anyone, not my mother, not my closest friend, not the therapist I would eventually see years later, was what had happened 6 months before the wedding. There was someone I worked with. I won't give him the dignity of a description. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, the kind that makes you feel chosen when they pay attention to you. There was a work conference in Ottawa in late February. Too much wine at the hotel bar, a decision I made, or let happen. I've never been fully honest with myself about which that I spent the next 20 years trying to put away somewhere I wouldn't have to look at it. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it was one time, it meant nothing. I would never do it again. It would never affect anyone. It was over. I told myself all the things people tell themselves, and then I found out I was pregnant. I want to explain what it's like to hold a pregnancy test in a bathroom in a rented apartment in Toronto while your fiancé is in the other room watching the Leafs game and you feel the floor tilt beneath you. It's not dramatic. The way it looks in movies, it's very quiet. The world just gets very, very small and very still, and you stand there doing math in your head that you don't want to do. The timing was, it was possible, with my husband. Not certain, but possible. I told myself it was possible. I told myself it was his. I picked that version of the story and I held onto it with both hands, and I did not let go. We got married 5 months later. Our daughter was born that December. She was tiny and perfect and screamed the whole first night, and my husband held her in the hospital room at 3 in the morning and looked at her like she was something he'd been waiting for without knowing it. And I watched him, and I felt something crack open in my chest that is never fully closed. For the first few years, I almost convinced myself. You get very good at not thinking about things when you need to. You make lunches and schedule dentist appointments and argue about whose turn it is to call the plumber, and you fill every hour of the day until there isn't any room left for the thought you're trying to outrun. Our daughter grew up with her father's stubbornness, and I was always told, my eyes. She was smart and a little difficult, and absolutely certain she was right about everything, and I loved her more than I have ever loved anything. He coached her minor hockey team for 3 years, even though he didn't particularly love hockey. He drove her to every tournament. He built her a reading nook in her bedroom because she read constantly and didn't have enough shelf space. He showed up. There were moments, just moments, where something would catch in my throat, when she'd do something that didn't quite fit either of us, when her hands looked different. I would push it away. I had become an expert at pushing it away. My husband and I had a decent marriage. I want to be honest about that because it matters. We were not miserable. We had good years, years where we laughed, where we traveled, where we were genuinely happy. A road trip to Nova Scotia when our daughter was 9, a summer when we renovated the kitchen ourselves, and it was a complete disaster, and we couldn't stop laughing about it. His parents' 50th anniversary, where we danced badly to old Motown records in someone's backyard. But there was always this distance I couldn't account for. Not constant. Intermittent, like a bad signal. He would look at me sometimes, not often, just sometimes, and there was something behind his eyes I couldn't read. I told myself it was just the way long marriages settle. I told myself everyone feels this occasionally. I told myself a lot of things. It was our daughter's 17th birthday that changed everything. Though changed is the wrong word, because I think what it really did was stop pretending. She needed a blood test for a school medical form, and because she was 17 and dramatic about needles, she asked me to come with her. Routine, blood type, basic panel. The kind of thing that takes 15 minutes and costs nothing under provincial coverage. The results came back, and her family doctor called me. Not with alarm, just with a clarifying question. He rattled off the blood types. Hers. Mine. And then he paused and said, "And your husband's type is?" Because there was a discrepancy. The kind that doesn't make biological sense. I stood in our kitchen with the phone against my ear, and I felt 20 years of careful not thinking collapse at once. I told the doctor I'd call him back. I hung up. I stood there for a very long time. I didn't tell my husband. I want to be clear about that. I chose, again, not to tell him. I found reasons. Our daughter's exams were coming up. The holidays were close. There was never a right time. And I let that be the excuse. The truth is, I was afraid, not of him, but of myself, of what it would mean to finally say the words out loud, of having to watch his face when I did. What I did not know, what I would not find out until that doctor's office 5 years later, was that he already knew. Not suspected. Knew. He told me afterward, quietly, in the car on the way home from the appointment, while I stared at the dashboard and he drove. He said that when our daughter was around 8 years old, he had gotten a blood test for a life insurance policy, and the numbers hadn't added up. He'd done more research. He'd understood what it meant. He had sat with that knowledge for 9 years by the time we were sitting in that doctor's office together. 9 years. I asked him why he didn't say anything. Why he didn't leave. Why he didn't leave. Why he kept showing up to parent-teacher nights and anniversary dinners and all of it, knowing what he knew. He was quiet for a long time. We were on the 401 by then, the flat gray stretch of highway outside the city, and it was starting to snow, and he kept his eyes on the road. Because she was mine, he said. Whatever else was true, she was mine. I wasn't going to blow up her life over something she had nothing to do with. I started to cry. I'm not sure I was even crying for the right reasons. Relief, maybe. Grief. The particular shame of being seen completely by someone you've wronged. He let me cry. He didn't comfort me. He didn't reach over and touch my hand. He just drove. I need you to know, I said eventually, that I am sorry. I know that doesn't. I know you are, he said, not warmly, not coldly, just as a fact. We drove the rest of the way home in silence. What I wasn't prepared for was what came after. I had imagined, in the vague, avoidant way, I had imagined things for years, that if the truth ever came out, there would be a crisis, and then a resolution, a confrontation, and then some kind of answer. I thought that truth, when it finally arrived, would feel like an ending. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like being handed a bill for 20 years of interest. My husband didn't shout. He didn't punish me in any dramatic way. He continued to live in our house, sleep in our bed, make his coffee in the morning. But something had shifted, and it was quiet and total. He was polite. He was present for our daughter. But the warmth, the specific warmth that had been there in the early years, even in a muted form, even intermittently, was gone. He had made a decision, I think, to spend whatever remained of his emotional energy on our daughter and on the careful management of his own dignity. And there was nothing left over for me. I don't blame him. I genuinely don't. Our daughter was 22 when she found out. That was my decision. I told her, not because I had to, but because she deserved to know the truth about her own biology, and I didn't trust myself to keep it from her indefinitely. I sat down with her at our kitchen table one Saturday morning, and I told her everything. The conference, the timing, what I'd chosen to believe, what I'd chosen not to examine. She didn't yell at me either. She got very still, the way she does when she's thinking hard. And she looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "Does Dad know?" "Yes," I said. "He's known for a while." She was quiet for a long time. Then, he never said anything to me. No. She got up and went upstairs. I heard her on the phone with him. They spoke for almost an hour. I don't know what he said to her. I never asked, and she never told me. But when she came back downstairs, she came and sat next to me, not across from me, and she put her hand on mine. "I'm angry at you," she said. "I want you to know that." I know. But he's still my dad. He's always been my dad. That's not going to change. I nodded. I couldn't talk. "And you're still my mom," she said. "That's not going to change either. But I need some time." She gave herself that time. 6 months where our calls were shorter, where she was careful and a little formal with me in a way she'd never been before. It was the most painful 6 months of my life, and it was exactly what I deserved. My husband and I separated the following spring. It was mutual, which is not the same as saying it was easy. He found an apartment in Kitchener, close to where he'd grown up. I stayed in the house for another year before selling it. We were civil about everything, the finances, the furniture, the logistics. We have never not been civil, which is almost harder than fighting would have been. At least a fight would have given me somewhere to put the guilt. He is not a man who performs his pain. He never has been. He dealt with 22 years of knowing something quietly and completely on his own, and he has continued to deal with the aftermath the same way. He goes to his apartment. He calls our daughter every Sunday. He took up woodworking, apparently. She showed me a picture of a side table he made, solid maple, beautifully finished. He sent me a card on our daughter's university graduation. Just a short note, nothing personal, but he signed it with his name and that meant something. I think, or I wanted it to. I started seeing a therapist about 2 years after the separation. I was resistant to it for a long time, in the way that you're resistant to things that you know are going to require you to be honest. She did not let me be vague. She asked hard questions and she waited patiently for real answers, and eventually I started giving them. What I learned, what I am still learning, is that I spent 22 years managing a secret instead of making a decision. I kept telling myself that staying quiet was protecting people, protecting my daughter from instability, protecting my husband from pain, protecting our family from falling apart. But the truth is that staying quiet was protecting me. It was protecting me from consequences, from accountability, from the discomfort of being truly known by the people I loved. That kind of self-protection is not the same as love, even when you're telling yourself it is. I also learned that my husband's choice to stay, to know and not say anything, to raise her anyway, was not simple or clean either. Staying silent was his way of controlling the only thing he could control. Our daughter was right to call him her father, completely and without hesitation. But he was also carrying something alone that he didn't have to carry alone, and that cost him. I can see that now. The quiet distance that was always there. The moments behind his eyes I could never read. That was a man carrying weight that should have been shared. There is no version of the story where anyone comes out clean. My daughter got married last September in a small ceremony outside of Ottawa. Outdoor venue, late afternoon light, 60 people. She was radiant. Her dad walked her down the aisle, and I watched him at the altar handing her off to her husband, and his face was so open and so proud and so completely uncomplicated. And I thought, whatever I took from him, I could not take that. That was real. That was always real. He and I sat at adjacent tables at the reception. We danced once, the parents' dance, the one the DJ calls you up for, and we were careful and a little stiff, and it was awkward, and we both knew it, and then it was over and we sat back down, and that was fine. Afterward, in the parking lot, he stopped next to my car for a moment. We hadn't spoken privately in a long time. She looked happy, he said. She really did, I said. He nodded. He put his hands in the pockets of his jacket, and he looked at me for a moment. Not with warmth, not with coldness, just with the particular steadiness that has always been the most defining thing about him. And then he said, "Take care of yourself." And he walked to his car. I stood there in the parking lot for a while after his taillights disappeared. The night was clear and cold the way October nights get in Ontario. That particular cold that smells like leaves and the end of something. And I thought about the doctor's office, and the hotel bar in Ottawa, and the pregnancy test in the apartment bathroom, and the kitchen table where I finally told the truth, and the maple side table he built in his apartment, and all the ordinary mornings that make up 22 years of a life. I don't know if I am a good person who made a terrible mistake or something more complicated than that. I suspect the honest answer is more complicated. I know that I hurt someone who didn't deserve to be hurt the way I hurt him, and that I spent 20 years choosing my own comfort over his right to the truth, and that our daughter had to absorb the consequences of my choices as a grown woman, when she should never have had to absorb them at all. What I know for certain is that the silence didn't protect anyone. It just made the damage quieter, and quieter damage spreads further. I am 51 years old. I live alone in a condo in Hamilton, close to the water. I have a therapist I trust, and a small group of friends who know the real version of the story. My daughter calls me on Thursdays, and we are, slowly, imperfectly finding our way back to each other. Some mornings, I sit with my coffee and look out at the lake, and I think about what it would have meant to simply tell the truth all those years ago. Not because I think it would have ended better. Maybe it would have ended worse. But I would have been a person who told the truth. And I think that matters. Not because the world would have known, but because I would have. That's the thing about carrying a secret for 20 years. It doesn't just hide the thing you're trying to hide, it hides you, too. And somewhere in all that hiding, you forget that you're the one who chose to disappear. I used to think that keeping quiet was a form of kindness, that if nobody was actively hurting, then nothing was really broken. I told myself that for 22 years, and I got very good at believing it, the way you get good at anything you practice long enough. But here's what I understand now. Sitting in this condo with my coffee going cold and the lake outside doing whatever lakes do in November, the silence didn't protect my husband. It didn't protect my daughter. It protected me, just me, and every consequence that followed. The distance in our marriage, the look on my daughter's face at that kitchen table, the parking lot where he said, "Take care of yourself," and walked away, every bit of it was the natural result of that original choice. Not punishment from the universe, not fate, just cause and effect, playing out the way it always does, slowly and completely. My husband carried something for 9 years that I put down on him without even knowing I'd done it. He didn't rage. He didn't crumble. He made a decision, a hard, clear-eyed decision to keep showing up for our daughter anyway, because he understood something I hadn't figured out yet, that integrity isn't about what you do when things are easy. It's about what you do when you know something devastating and still choose to act with decency. He had more of that than I gave him credit for. More than I had, certainly, at 28 in a hotel bar in Ottawa, making choices I wasn't brave enough to own. What I failed at wasn't just faithfulness. I failed at honesty, which is a different thing and in some ways a harder thing, because honesty requires you to sit with discomfort instead of managing it away. It requires you to trust that the people you love are strong enough to handle the truth. I didn't trust my husband with that. I didn't trust my daughter. And so I made myself the quiet architect of a life built on something unstable, and I told myself it was holding together just fine. The thing about not being honest with the people around you is that eventually you stop being honest with yourself. I genuinely didn't know for years where the story I was telling ended and the truth began. That kind of confusion costs you. It costs you the clarity to make good decisions. It costs you the ability to really know yourself or be known by anyone else. My therapist called it self-protective fog. I think that's exactly right. What my daughter showed me in those 6 months of careful, painful distance, and then in the moment she sat beside me instead of across from me, was what it actually looks like to hold two things at once, to be angry and still choose love, to be hurt and still show up. She didn't minimize what I did, she didn't pretend, but she decided on her own terms what kind of person she wanted to be in response to it. That took more strength than anything I managed in 2 decades of silence. I don't know if I'm someone who learned her lesson in any clean, redemptive sense. I think I'm someone who finally stopped running from a hard truth and started learning to live inside it. That's slower and less satisfying than a turning point, but I think it's more honest. And honest is the thing I'm trying to practice now. One day at a time, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then. The lake is gray this morning. There's ice forming along the edge near the rocks. I wrap both hands around my mug and I think, I still have time to be someone who tells the truth. Not to undo anything. Just to be that person going forward, for whatever that's worth. It turns out it's worth quite a lot.